So basically, each planet has a sign of exaltation, and what that means is each planet, there's a certain sign where it's like the biggest and best for that planet. And that's not to be confused with the sign of domicile. So each planet has a domicile or home sign where it feels like the most comfortable and the most natural. That sign sort of helps the planet embody its natural traits the best. But the exalted sign is where it's like the strongest. So it might not be the most like natural or the most normal version of that planet, but it's the like strongest, most exemplified, most the biggest and best sort of. And in opposition to that, the sign all the way directly opposite the sign of exaltation is the sign of fall, where that planet is the weakest, it's debilitated, its traits are not naturally expressed very well. And basically, there are other implications to that too, but that's basically the gist of it. I'm not going to be totally focusing on just that concept in this video, but I just wanted to explain it. And basically, each planet has a sign of exaltation, but because the outer planets were only discovered in recent times, their signs of exaltation have not been set in stone. Um, First of all, some people disagree on whether outer planets should even have signs of domicile or exaltation at all. Many traditional astrologers don't include the outer planets with exaltation or domicile. But for the people who do believe that the outer planets should have signs of exaltation or domicile, there's generally not a consensus on which sign should be assigned to which planet. Like for Uranus, there is sort of an agreement that it should be exalted in Scorpio and therefore at fall in Taurus, where it is now. Which I do agree with that. It makes a lot of sense if you understand the archetype of Uranus. It's very unpredictable. It's very individualistic. It likes to be different from others. It likes to be unpredictable, and it's sort of based on constant change and evolution. So Scorpio embodies all that really well, and you could see the connection between Scorpio and Aquarius, that they're both fixed signs, but they're both fixed on change. They're both having to do with being unpredictable and sort of being individualistic and standing apart from the rest of the crowd. So there's definitely a connection there, and Taurus is more conventional. It's more steady and consistent. So for Uranus to be there seems really sort of out of place. Uranus likes to be unpredictable and crazy and radical. So it's not, so it makes a lot of sense that it'd be exalted in Scorpio and at fall in Taurus. But for Neptune and Pluto, there isn't as much of a consensus. I think technically in modern astrology, Neptune is starting to be considered exalted in Cancer. But I've looked and I haven't found a reason for that. It's never really made sense to me or resonated. Neptune is the planet of dreams and illusions and, collective soul or collective consciousness or psychic abilities, intuition, stuff like that. So it makes sense it would be in domicile in Pisces. Pisces definitely has the most to do with all that. And Cancer is a water sign, so it does kind of have to do with emotions and intuition, but I just don't see Cancer being like, I guess Cancer could have some kind of escapist tendencies a little bit, but it doesn't so much embody the the whole fantasy world that Neptune is supposed to be all about. So that never resonated with me at all. And then Pluto doesn't really have an agreed sign of exaltation at all, really. So I took it upon myself to ponder the signs of the exaltation for the outer planets, and I came up with something. This is based on the work of other astrologers as well as my own ponderings. No one has set it up in a scheme like this that I've found anywhere. Um, but yeah, so basically, let me get into it. So, of course, the planets, like I said, up until Saturn, that's all ancient knowledge. So the signs of exaltation of the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn are basically set in stone. Those aren't going anywhere. They make a lot of sense. They work out with chart analysis. Same with Uranus and Scorpio. That makes a lot of sense. So really, the only thing I've put together here is Neptune. I also pondered a bit on the nature of the outer planets in general and their meanings, just because I think we take for granted the interpretation of the outer planets, because they've only been discovered in recent times, and astrology, I think, is somewhat scientific in a way, but it's not nearly as organized as most fields, like scientifically. If you want to think about it like a scientific field, it's not very organized. It's not very regulated. So when these outer planets were discovered, there wasn't a really organized way on figuring out what each new planet ruled or was all about. Astrologers kind of debated and pondered for decades, if not centuries, about what the planet's role was before we kind of came to these understandings. And especially with, Uranus was discovered in 1781, but Neptune was only discovered in the mid 1800s, and Pluto was discovered, I think, in 1930. So it's less and less time that we've had for these couple planets to understand. And especially with Pluto, it's various astrologers had totally different understandings of what that planet might be about, different theories. And again, like I said, it wasn't regulated. And basically, whoever wrote the best-selling book basically sort of won the debate in a way. It wasn't regulated at all. So really, with the outer planet meanings, I just looked at them again a little bit. I also think that some of their I just don't think that we've really explored the outer planets to the extent that we have the inner ones. With the inner planets, there's more of a rich archetype to them, I think. With each of the inner planets, there are different good qualities and bad qualities, different strengths and weaknesses. There's like a full rich character and an archetype, like a person. No one could fully embody any particular planet, but each planet has a rich enough persona to describe a character very fully. So like Venus is attractive and it rules desire and love and beauty, and typically it's a very good, benefic, fortuitous planet. But it could also be the pitfalls of desire. It could be manipulation or covertly manipulating a situation to gain something you desire or something like that. So there's this sort of complexity that I don't think you get with Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Like Neptune rules illusion, mysticism, spirituality. It's just not as rich of an archetype, I think. And there have been speculations that perhaps the outer planets weren't named correctly, because with the inner planets, their names go back for thousands of years, and we don't even know why were those names assigned to those planets, because there does seem to be a connection between the mythology and the astrology. For instance, Mercury or Hermes was a god of communication. He was the messenger god. He had to do with like inventions. And if you look at Mercury in astrology, Mercury is the communicator and the messenger, the planet of information. So there's an obvious connection between Mercury, the astrological archetype, with Mercury, the mythological character. And that's very true for the rest of the planets as well. The question is, with these outer planets, do they live up to the mythological characters? Can we infer knowledge about the astrological archetype represented by the outer planets from the mythology with the same name? And there's two different schools of thought on that. One says that, we don't know how the inner planets were named, but they definitely seem to be truly representative of those mythological archetypes. And because the outer planets were named by astronomers, and who knows why they chose those particular names, we can't really trust them. And maybe we should look for other mythological characters that would be better representatives of the outer planets. Okay, that's one school of thought. The other school of thought says that, sort of like in numerology, most people don't know about numerology. Most parents don't think about it when they name their kid. But if you break down the letters into numbers and you find a number for a name, there's oftentimes like tremendous insight about that person's character and their life and the themes they experience. So that is supposedly just synchronicity, like it's like magic that that parent just happened to choose the correct name with the right energy signature and that it like manifested or what have you. And so there's one argument just saying that the planets with the planets it's the same way, that it's sort of divine circumstance that the outer planets names ring true, and that they must be associated with those characters. And there's another sort of twist on that, that some people, we don't even know how astrology works, so maybe it's our own projections that make it true. So maybe us naming the planet makes it like the mythology archetype. We don't really know, but basically what I'm saying here, what I'm saying personally, is that it is debatable. I think personally that there is a debate to be made, that there is merit on both sides, that especially with Uranus and Neptune. I mean, especially with Neptune. Neptune, or Poseidon, god of the sea, there's not much there in that character that relates to that, the astrological planet Neptune, or to Pisces for that matter. It's there's just not much there. So in my research, I found that some people are saying that Uranus is really more like Prometheus astrologically or mythologically, and that Neptune, perhaps should have been named Dionysus. And I think with Uranus, it's really debatable. It could be Uranus was named after the god Uranus, which was the god of the sky, and Uranus and Aquarius, which it rules, both have to do with things coming down from the sky, whether it be, dreams or ideas, shifts of consciousness, technology, or things that move through the sky, like spacecraft or internet waves, what have you. I mean, so you could do a lot with that. Also, Saturn was the father of Jupiter, and Uranus or Uranus was the father of Saturn, and they are sort of consecutive in the solar system. So I mean, there is an argument to be made for Uranus or Uranus, to that name to correspond to the planet. He's some people say he should be called Prometheus because Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to humankind. So just that story alone gives you a lot to go off of. That it would have to do with rebellion and being an outcast, being punished by society, also having to do with enlightenment, bringing enlightenment to humankind, bringing invention. So all those themes, kind of scream Aquarius a little bit and do have a lot to do with Uranus. But either way, you could kind of come from Prometheus or Uranus and sort of come to the same conclusion, I think. So I think that's more debatable and it might not really matter. But with Neptune, I found it really interesting, exploring the character of Dionysus. For those of you who don't know, Dionysus was one of the 12 Olympians, and he was said to be the god of like wine and drunkenness. And if you were under the influence of Dionysus, you would be very lustrous, very sexual, very drunk, very belligerent. He would basically make people crazy, but a lot of the time, it's sort of that infatuation. It would rule those crazy states of mind where you become sort of crazy and you see the world in a different way, but you feel so much passion and emotion that your perspective seems more real than anything. And the question becomes, for someone who's experiencing a crazy state of mind like that, whether they're drunk or they're in love or they're infatuated or they're off in some fantasy world just inspired by a piece of music or something, the question is, are those states of mind real, and could they in fact be more real than the traditional perspective, the normal way of seeing the world? Could that actually be like genius? Could it be grounding higher dimensional energies and ideas and emotions? Or is it just totally crazy and delusional and it just makes no sense? And a lot of these things aren't sustainable. Infatuation or experiencing some larger than life love, it doesn't usually last. So was it ever real to begin with? We don't really know. And at its core, all these things are subjective. When you listen to a piece of music that inspires you, you might think it's the most amazing thing in the world, but if you share it with someone else, they might not get it. Music, in essence, is subjective. Different individuals or cultures experience music totally differently. So that would be a Dionysus theme. It's sort of, it makes, I mean, to me, listening to this, it sort of seems like Neptune, but a more complex, rich version of the astrological archetype of Neptune. And I could definitely see it associated with Pisces. Dionysus, as a character, his mother died before he was born, so he's associated with trauma and sort of self-destruction. It's this basically going crazy and seeing the world as both amazing and beautiful, but also tragic and sort of the destruction that's brought on by seeing the world so holistically and taking, seeing everything as maybe it truly is, or where you don't even know, are you genius or are you just delusional, and it just destroys you, and it's this sort of self-destruction. So of course all that really sounds like Pisces. To me it also sounded like Sagittarius, that there would be a connection there. And I'm getting a little off track here, but anyway, basically the outer planets are not set in stone, that there could be truth from other ways of looking at it. With the Dionysus thing, so to me the whole Dionysus thing sounded like Pisces and it sounded like Sagittarius, and that would fit into the domicile scheme, which I might talk about in a different video. But it also sounded to me a little bit like Aquarius, and I started wondering, it just really clicked, and I just felt like this sounds like Neptune, but a more interesting, compelling, like there could be some truth to this. Like maybe Neptune isn't just, because it would be delusion and fantasy and music and spirituality and all that, but more than that. It's just a kind of like that, but a more rich character. So, and I connected it with Pisces, Sagittarius, but then also Aquarius, because Aquarius is a sign of genius and of being maybe either really genius or really crazy or both, and seeing the world holistically. And I think Neptune, although it would be more at home in a sign like Pisces or maybe Sagittarius, it would be exalted in Aquarius, because Aquarius is also genius. Like I said, it sees the world holistically. It's about that collective mind, collective spirit, or what have you, that unification, or that psychedelic experience where you see that everything is connected. Aquarius experiences that kind of similarly to Pisces, but Aquarius is more logical and rational. So I think Neptune could be not at home there, but it would be very strong, because it would experience a lot of the similar themes it's familiar with, but in a more perhaps rational way, which would just be kind of a different side, and I think could really strengthen it. And I did research, and I've actually found some people, even people who haven't connected Neptune with Dionysus, have still proposed that it could possibly be exalted in Aquarius. And that would actually make a lot of sense, because it would be at fall in Leo. And Leo is more about the individual. It's more about the physical experience and the self-expression of the individual, not the group. And Neptune's more about the collective consciousness and whatnot. So, so it would be kind of out of place in Leo, I feel like. So that kind of fits with that. Uranus we talked about. And then Pluto, it took me a while. At first I was thinking maybe Pluto could be exalted in Pisces. I mean, with Pluto it's hard to tell, because we haven't gone through a full Pluto cycle since its discovery. Pluto takes 248 years to go through all the 12 signs, or in other words, to orbit the sun. And it was only discovered in 1930, so we haven't even experienced it in all the signs, at least not knowingly, not aware of its existence. But we have experienced it in Leo, and you can sort of judge a little bit about a planet, about its exaltation, by when it's in that sign. So, so for instance, I got the idea of Pluto being exalted in Leo, and if it were exalted in Leo, that would mean you could look back at its transit in Leo, and that should have been a very Plutonian time. So in other words, the archetypes, the themes represented by Pluto would be playing out on a grand scale if during Pluto's transit in Leo, if it were exalted in that sign. Similar a little bit with Pluto transiting Scorpio, since Pluto is said to rule Scorpio. Also, one other thing is that when planets are exalted, that means that they sort of represent the group or the current culture of the society. So if you have a lot of planets in fall or detriment, you'll be sort of against the grain, against the society, maybe fighting for something that's unpopular in your current time and place. But if you have a lot of planets in domicile or exalted, you'll be very popular, very, very easily understood, and you'll generally believe in things that your society currently believes in. You'll be with the culture, not against the culture. Okay, so anyway, so if Pluto were exalted in Leo, that would mean that Plutonian themes should have been playing out during the Pluto and Leo transit, and that the Pluto and Leo generation should have been very accepted. And if you look back, Pluto was exalted in Leo, I think from 1940 to 1955 or something like that. It was like early 40s to mid to late 50s. And if you look at that time, or no, I think it was 1939 to 1950 or early 50s. And if you look at that time period, Pluto moved into Leo right before World War II, like right as World War II was starting. And that was basically destruction of the world on a grand scale. The world was destroyed and then sort of reborn again or transformed, kind of like the phoenix, which is associated with Pluto, how the phoenix it is engulfed in flames and destroyed, but it has to do that in order to be born anew again. And that's basically exactly what happened with the world during World War II. It was literally destroyed in order to be reborn again. Like human society was radically transformed. So that's very Plutonian. Also, if you look at the generation born during that time, you have many of the baby boomers were born then, probably most of them. And they were probably the most spoiled generation in human history because society was completely focused on them. Their parents they'd come out of the Great Depression and then come out of World War II, and they were just focused on having a family. They so wanted to have kids. So as kids, the Pluto and Leo generation was the focus of society. And then once they got older, because they were the largest generation of Americans in history, they were the focus. That the whole time they were aging, society was centered around them basically. So yeah, I mean, so it actually makes a lot of sense. And then also Pluto's very emotional and instinctive, and it's about survival and pride and power within yourself, power, exerting power. So it just makes sense that Leo, sort of explores a lot of those themes in perhaps a different way. And I do think that there's a connection between Leo and Scorpio. A lot of people who I guessed were Leo sun signs were actually Scorpio. And I've always noticed a similarity between the two signs. Both are very sort of proud signs, but in different ways. Scorpio is more introverted or covert, but they both have a lot to do with pride and, boundaries and self-expression or continuing the self. Also with reproduction or regeneration, I guess, in a way. So all these things are very Plutonian, so it makes sense. And then again, sort of similar but opposite to Neptune, Pluto's more about the individual, and it's very emotional, very instinctive. It's very intense. It's probably the most emotionally intense planet. Scorpio and Leo are emotional, and they can be kind of intense sometimes. But Aquarius Pluto would be at fall in Aquarius. And Aquarius is more about the group, not the individual, and it's more logical and rational. So Pluto it just seems like it'd be a lot more in its place in Leo rather than Aquarius. And so I kind of decided on those three outer planet exaltations. And I didn't even realize it at the time, but that would mean that each sign has one planet of exaltation if you include the north and the south node. North node exalted in Gemini, south node exalted in Sagittarius, and then if you put Neptune exalted in Aquarius, Pluto exalted in Leo, and Uranus exalted in Scorpio, each sign has one exalted planet. So it's kind of perfect. And also, that puts the three outer planets exalted in all fixed signs, which kind of makes sense because they're the slowest, and they, when they experience a sign, they really experience it, and they experience every little part of it very slowly, very steadily. They don't quickly change from one thing to another, so it makes sense they'd be associated with fixed signs, or exalted in fixed signs. And yeah, so I just thought that was interesting, and I think I haven't used it. I do want to research it a little bit more. I haven't seen if it works with like chart analysis tactics and stuff like that. Um, but I just thought it was interesting, so I figured I would share it. And yeah, and I do think the outer planets should have signs of exaltation. Because just because we didn't know about them doesn't mean that they're fundamentally different from the other planets. Because they're not different from the other planets; they're just farther out. So, just the fact that we weren't aware of them doesn't change what they are. Just because our perception of them was different or is different. So yeah, but I would definitely, if anyone has any other ideas or any criticisms, I'd definitely be interested in hearing it. And yeah, let me know if there's any other topics you'd like me to talk about, or any thoughts on this at all. I'd be happy to hear it. And thanks for listening. Thanks for making it to the end. And I'll see you later.